Hello and welcome to Mrs Mummypenny Talks with Ridley Writes. This is episode number 5 and we are going to be talking about our favourite and most influential women writers, which I'm terribly excited about. Just before we got on, in fact, Lynn said, you have got 5, haven't you? I've got a few more than 5, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to manage the list I've got here, but I'm sure it's going to be good. So, I mean, how have you been, Lynn? How's your week been?
I was thinking, are we gonna carry on that tradition every week of just checking in? Because we're being quite good with the timings of these podcasts. They're pretty much recorded in real time. So we record them mid one week and then it's released the following week. So it is quite, whatever we talk about is quite timely, isn't it? So yeah, I'm good. COVID scare isn't COVID, so everybody's happy again, but we did have a little bit of children at home for a couple of days, but that's fine. We binge watched, so the boys got home on Monday at 3:00 and we binge watched 18 episodes of a series called 911, the new series on Disney Plus. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Which resulted in some quite interesting questions, which I might share on Twitter later. But
fantastic.
Yeah, so yeah, it's great, and I'm excited to talk about this because this is quite a nice subject that ties into, well, I suppose what both of us do in a way, because I've written a book. Yeah, we're both writers. We're both women, and. Yeah, you obviously work with writers to help them turn their writing dreams in their head into a reality. And I've actually written 3 books, but I only really talk about the last one because it's the most proper book I wrote that I self-published. But yeah, I'm still getting orders through as well. It's very exciting. I'm going to put it down to the podcast. Yeah, because I think when you launch a new sort of channel out there and you get lots of people listening to it, it spikes up the interest again, doesn't it?
Yeah, people go and see what else you've done, don't they?
Yeah. And interestingly, lots of people are asking me about coaching at the moment, and coaching is not really something that's ever, or coaching or mentoring, I don't know what you'd want to call it, but it's just not something that's ever really sat well in my heart. Like, I've tried it and it's just not been something I've loved doing, and I have a bit of a rule that if something doesn't make me happy and I don't love doing it, I'm not going to do it.
Don't do it. It's a good rule. It's a really good rule.
So instead of the people instead of offering coaching, I just say to the people, well, I've written an amazing book, so buy the book, and it's going to save you loads of money as well, because the book's only $12.99, which you can get on my website.
Amazing.
Or Amazon.
Good plugs. All good plugs. Yes. So, where should we start? Well, why don't we start with our lists? Who are the women writers? What's the first women writer that you have got on your list that you recollect as being influential in your life, and why?
So I reckon that this woman is going to feature on your list because we grew up together and read certainly one of these books out to each other. I think we read the whole book out to each other one day in its entirety. So that's the most incredible Judy Blume, which so you'll be able to list more books than me, but obviously Forever is the book that it's like the Bible of our mid-teenage years. I think it's what gave us our sex education when we were younger. Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. What were
Mother was the other one. That was it. So the younger one, wasn't it?
Yeah. And there was there was a book about a girl who had like a back brace.
Yes, I remember that one as well.
Can't remember what that was called.
No.
Yeah, so they sort of guided us through our teenage years from, well, not, I suppose earlier, from like 11 maybe up to 13, 14. Then we probably outgrew them. But yeah, I just have a very clear memory of lying in your third bedroom, your little bedroom in your Long Rock house, just reading forever out to each other and giggling like, oh my gosh, learning all this new stuff. All about
crazy, sexy stuff. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, this is what you did on a Saturday afternoon before, you know, the internet.
We read books to each other.
We were so cool. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know if you remember any of these other ones, starring Sally J. Friedman as herself.
No.
It's Not the End of the World.
Yes.
Yeah. What else we got? Blubber I've already mentioned. And now that I've clicked onto it, it's now not giving me a good list. I don't remember a lot of these. Salesman, fourth grade, nothing.
Oh yeah. But
Deanie. I remember Deanie and Tiger Eyes.
Deanie, yeah.
There's another author that we read as well, who wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer, and she wrote another book that had to do with astral projection and witchcraft. I can't remember the name of either the book or the author, I don't think. But I remember that being quite an influential one in our lives as well.
We spent a lot of time trying to do astral projection.
We did, didn't we? Yeah, we did.
Also influenced by the film, The Craft. Would The Craft have come out? Oh no, maybe The Craft came out after we were teenagers.
I don't know.
Oh, because they actually managed astral projection in that film, and I was like,
what I remember is going to, again, hello people, this is pre-internet. I remember going to the library in Penzance on Moorab Road and picking up these books. I remember this woman who was an occultist of some sort, and she'd written a book on astral projection, and she was very lilac. I remember she was wearing like a lilac dress, and she had kind of lilac hair and very scary eyes. And that for a while, I read that as a kind of a guidebook for us to figure out how to do this astral projection thing. The whole idea was we wanted to meet up in the middle of the night in our astrally projected selves. I similarly remember us having very early computers. Commodore 64 was used, ZX Spectrum 24K. Look at that for some memory. On the computer, I mean, not me. And us trying to work out how to replicate war games and be able to communicate with each other. Not knowing there was no place for the phone wire to go in. But anyway, yeah, constantly trying to be in communication with each other.
yeah.
Kids these days, they got it so easy. They just WhatsApp, you're done.
Yeah. So, no, her books were amazing, and they were a huge part of my learning teenage years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, Judy Blume hit my list as well, but I don't need to say any more about her.
Okay, but so the next, you go for one of yours next.
Well, I did a couple of things. I did lots of things actually, but I went a bit earlier, sort of predating you and me, which Enid Blyton was an enormous.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Yeah. Famous Five, Magic Faraway Tree. Didn't love The Secret Seven quite so much, but you know, really, I actually remember after reading the Magic Faraway Tree, I remember trying to write a version of it of my own when I was about, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something, taking it into school and trying to show it to the school teacher as a way of saying, you know, is this any good? So yeah, no, Enid Blyton was a huge influence, and I actually looked up some stuff on her because I know obviously a lot of her books came under question in sort of the 50s and 60s for the kind of language and potential sort of inherent racism within it. But she wrote 700 books.
Wow.
And she sold over 600 million copies worldwide. She's the 4th most translated author in the world. And I heard a really great radio program about her life a while ago that said actually she's a brilliant gateway author to get kids into reading even today, and an awful lot of the books that were more than dubious have either been pulled or elements of them have been rewritten. But yeah, I mean, absolutely fascinating and very much she would just sit down at the typewriter and write, and then there was a book, and away you go. So yeah, really impressive.
I think though that I didn't go back before my teenage years, so she would have made my list, because I think I read every single Famous Five and Secret Seven book that existed. So I probably read 200 of those 700 books.
Yeah.
I think a lot of books from that time now, I don't know if you've started to do it with your children, but when I reread them with mine, there are, like, I've struggled to read some of the Roald Dahl books because it's just felt a bit sexist. Like the book that stands out, and people will probably disagree here, but Fantastic Mr. Fox was the last book I read, and it was a nice thin book, and it's just a book about the man saving the day and doing everything, and that's not how the world works, right?
No, exactly. And you know, again, I think there are some questions about some of Roald Dahl's beliefs. But we've only just, with Roald Dahl, we've only just started to venture in there, ironically starting with the revolting rhymes, because of course Amy knows all of the fairy tales, so the revolting rhymes make sense to her. Although I'm reading some of them and going, are you a bit disturbed by this? Is this okay? Should I be reading this to you? But I've been thinking more and more that I should probably do a bit of a bookshelf. I don't know, it's one to think about, a bit of a bookshelf cleanse for the kids, because actually, what are we doing? Yes, we're going down memory lane ourselves, and that's nice, but is that the right sort of material that we want to be passing on to our children? It's a big question. It's not a question for today, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you're pretty safe with the magic faraway tree, though.
Oh, when we get there, I'll let you know.
Oh, yeah, lovely. Right, shall I so right, my next one is a bit random, because I've sort of progressed on a little bit, because I was obsessed with reading books when I was a teenager. I would particularly before the time I discovered boys and alcohol, I used to hang out at the library all the time. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I would spend hours going through the shelves and, you know, picking the fiction books, looking through all the like witchy occult books in the non-fiction section. So yeah, I devoured books, and a series of books that so I'm going to say two authors, and I don't really know, they're not the books that define me, but they're just standout books. So firstly there was the Virginia Andrews series, which I really standout memory of, maybe a little bit older than, that's more sort of late teens, isn't it? Because those books are actually quite dark. About some kids being locked.
You see, I disagree, because I mean, I know that I read Flowers in the Attic before we moved to Cornwall, and I'm pretty sure that, yeah, and I'm pretty sure that we both then carried on at about 11, 12, reading the rest of the Virginia Andrews books.
Maybe we did. Wow, but Flowers in the Attic's a really dark book.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so moving on from her, that sort of, but a similar sort of thing, is another series of books I got obsessed with, was Jilly Cooper books. And that must have been later on, because they are pretty like racy. But again, I learned a lot from those books.
Yeah.
Those are my standout female authors from my my under 20 years anyway.
Well, I mean, to add into that, I one that isn't necessarily a standout author in terms of something that's heavily influenced my life, I don't think, but I read a lot of, and so did you, is Francine Pascal and the Sweet Valley High books.
Oh yeah.
I hadn't realised, but in the 90s they made a TV series out of Sweet Valley High, and apparently in that series there were 189 books. The series ran from 1983 to 2003. So and they went to university. There was Sweet Valley University and things. The stories carried on beyond. Do you remember they were about two twins? They're about twins, Jessica and Elizabeth. And one of them was very grounded and bookish and a good listener, and then the other one was a bit more devious and a bit more appearance focused and popular with the boys. So. But anyway, we read a lot of those. You may not remember reading them, but I know we both read a lot of those. So that she landed on my list for that reason.
Just imagine though, being that author, like I suppose there wasn't that much money in maybe Enid Blyton's time, but coming up with that idea of that one book and that being serialized, that you can then write 100 and whatever it was you said, 189 books. That author, she must have made an absolute fortune, and to have a TV series like to
optioned, yeah. So she was on my list. Another author that I read a lot of. It's interesting because kids do this. You read series. Once you get an author, you kind of keep going with it. And I still find it kind of a delight as an adult when I find a new author and I think, oh, brilliant! I can read lots of this person's. But I read Eleanor M. Brent-Dyer. She wrote the Chalet School stories, which I don't think you did read. There was over 100 books in that series as well. And then Daphne du Maurier, I read loads of as a kid, as a teenager. The obvious one being Rebecca, because everybody likes to buy you Rebecca or mention Rebecca, and then they're all horror-stricken because they haven't read the sodding story. And you're like, you do know that she's the adulterous wife that gets murdered, don't you? She's usually, oh yeah, not making any similarities. No, thanks. But yeah, I loved Daphne du Maurier's books. Read them before we moved down to Cornwall, because obviously they're mostly set in Cornwall, and then once we moved down as well, read more of them. And she also wrote about 50 books. So yeah, these are all very prolific women, which I think is a key theme. And then Madeline L'Engle was one that I read, probably A Ring of Endless Light was one I read when we were kind of, I think it must have been 15, 16. It was just at that cusp time of moving into A-levels. It was sort of one of my last young adult fiction books, really, that I read. And I still read it at least once a year. And I've discovered that she's written, lots of books. Did I write down how many books she's written? Oh, yeah, 60 odd books. And she's just a delightful writer. And as a young adult fiction writer, she had a really great voice for she doesn't talk down. You read it even as an adult, and you kind of recognize there's a real complexity to her young adult characters in her stories. I've just gone all kind of funny because I was like, oh, I loved sci-fi as well, and I was trying to work out why I didn't have any sci-fi authors on. I've got Ursula Le Guin on, but she's sort of come into my life a bit later. But then I realised all the sci-fi authors I was reading were male, and that's why they're not on the list. Anyway.
Yeah. And I was going to say, do you have, going off slightly on a tangent, but do you have many books where you always, no fail, read them every year?
Yes, I do have quite a few of those. Some of them have changed over the years. I used to read Lord of the Rings every year.
Oh my God, that's a heavy book.
Which is one of the books I was like, that's probably one of the most influential books. That The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are my story. I read them when I was 9, which is sort of bonkers, and then have reread them numerous times since.
Wow. I'm sure we had to read one of them at school, and I've got bad memories of being forced to read a book. Did we not?
No, I mean, not that I remember. Maybe you had to read it before you went to
No, you wouldn't read that kind of book at primary school, would you?
I don't remember us reading Lord of the Rings in English.
No, I for some reason, or maybe I've tried to read it, or maybe I tried to sit through the film and got really bored. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it. But that's like male authors. But I read The Alchemist every year, and I absolutely love it. And I find new meaning and signs and bits in it every year, which is also by a male author.
Yes.
Coelho.
for YouTube viewers, this is my original copy, purchased from I think the library. Can't remember what library is that telling me. Cornwall Library. So it was purchased from Cornwall County Library. So it was one of the books they got rid of. It says cancelled in the front, just so you all know I didn't steal a book from the library. But yeah, do you remember every once in a while the library would have like sales of books?
Yeah.
And buy them for like 5p or something ridiculous. But yeah, so it's the original. It's my original copy that I reread. So more from your list. What else is on your list?
So moving on a little bit to I've read a lot of self-helpy type books throughout my life, always searching for meaning, and the first one, and this isn't the best one I've read, but it's the first one, so I suppose it goes on my list as being a standout book, is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. So it's an American book, and I think I read it when I first started my corporate career, so in HSBC. I remember they used to, like, every week a mini sort of library of books would be reeled into the office, self-helpy type books, and we could,
wow, that's quite progressive.
Yeah, we could choose whatever we wanted to read. So yeah, I read Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, and it's been quite a sort of phrase to define my life. Like,
your life by, yeah.
There's so much stuff that scares me all the time, but I really do embrace that feeling of the fear and just think, no, like, F it, just do it anyway. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I'd like to think that more of the times it's worked out than not, but yeah, I just be brave and take some steps that you wouldn't necessarily, but yeah, and quite interesting that it was actually written by a woman, because I think a lot of self-help books, particularly, I think it was written in the 80s. Most self-help books in the 80s would have been written by men.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a good one for me. Have you got any non-fiction on your list?
I mean, yes, I've got Audre Lorde on my list.
Oh yeah, you love her, don't you?
I do love her very much.
I've never. You always share her quotes on Instagram, and I've never read any of her work. Sorry.
I strongly recommend it. Get yourself a copy of Sister Outsider. You will absolutely love it. It's she's a poet and a feminist and essayist. So yeah, writes quite widely. And writes beautifully and puts into words things that about your experience as a woman that that I don't think anybody else has. She's absolutely phenomenal, and really challenges, from a feminist point of view, really challenges anybody who reads her to really think about how you're living life and to question some of the assumptions that you might be making about what you can and can't do. And yeah, she's absolutely fascinating. There's a couple of essays, in particular, Poetry is Not a Luxury, which is a fascinating essay about how poetry is almost the ideal feminine form, because you don't need a lot of time, you don't need a lot of materials, you can write a poem on the scrap of a receipt or something, and she talks about the idea that living in a patriarchal society, there's a need for us as women to reimagine and revision what we want our future to look like and the futures of our children to look like in a non-patriarchal society, and that to do that we need to almost find a new language, and that poetry enables us to put different ideas and words together in perhaps a different way, because we can't strive for a new and better future unless we've conceived of what that can be. Otherwise we're always just saying, well, we don't want that, but we're not saying what it is we do want. So that's really interesting, and she's fascinating. Yeah, she's high up there on my list.
Okay, I'll read Sister Outsider.
Sister Outsider. You'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it more than you expect to, I'm really sure. She also has this other great essay thinking of some of the subjects we've had so far about, I think it's called Uses of the Erotic. And she has a really fascinating exploration of what we think of as erotic, or what we could term erotic in society today, is actually more accurately called pornography. And the erotic as a sensation, as an experience, is much broader and much wider, and encompasses many more things than we think it does in our current narrow definition. There's a particularly and it makes sense in the context. It's not going to make sense as I say it now, but she talks about the experience of, you know, building a bookcase as being an erotic experience, which you wouldn't necessarily think, but it's all around. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to let you read it, and then you can come back and talk about how erotic your bookcase building is.
Okay, cool. So I've got two more on my list, and I'm sure they're probably on your list as well, but they're mates. So there's this group of women in America who, it's just like the most amazing sort of circle of women, and the two who have shaped a lot of my recent life with reading their works is Brené Brown and Glennon Doyle. Last year, where I read Untamed, one of her books. I read her for the first time. And Untamed is just the most amazing book that every single, certainly, woman should read. It's particularly key when you're going through a big change in your life, as I was last year, going through a horrible year of divorce. And it's like, she knows exactly where you are because she's been through it. It's just this, like, I mean, I listened to it on Audible, actually. And I ended up listening to it 3 times, because she'd almost like send me off into a reassured sleep. And then, like, her words would be sort of permeating my subconscious mind. It was amazing. It was such a great way to digest it. But there are times where it makes you cry. There are times when it makes you feel like happy and inspired and motivated. It's just the most incredible book. I love it. It's probably my favorite book of well, I mean, The Alchemist is completely different. It's probably my most favorite book of like recent years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've read it as well. You didn't read it quite as early on as me, did you? Because you were desperately waiting for your paper copy of the book.
Yeah, the copy didn't come. The copy took a while to come. They sold out by the time I put my order in. So yeah, I had to wait a bit longer to get it. But no, it is an amazing book, and I think yeah, Glennon Doyle. What probably most sticks with me is the opening story about
the cheetah.
The cheetah, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the sort of the analogy that we are in many senses caged by patriarchal society, but we're made to kind of feel like, well, no, we should think this is all right. It's not bad. I get fed and I'm looked after, and you know, and there's some sort of beautiful poetic language she talks about. But at night, Tabitha dreams about sleeping under a wide savannah sky, etc. And again, I think in that sense, that opening for me is very similar to a lot of how Audre Lorde writes, which is this idea of there's something else, and that sense that there's something else means there is, and we have to trust that, and we have to go to that place, we have to find that place and follow that something else vibe, which I think is really strong.
Yeah. There was I didn't read the article, but I sort of get the gist of what this article was talking about. So yesterday, I was in the Guardian. So obviously the big divorce news of this week is Bill Gates and Melinda Gates getting divorced after 27 years. And the article written, it wasn't an article actually, I'm in a Facebook group, which is, it's called like Working Mums Divorce Recovery Support or something. Like, it's actually an amazing group run by a psychotherapist friend of mine. But she was talking about the divorce and just this concept that maybe it's quite a sort of grown up thing to actually recognize that you come to a point where your lives just aren't growing in the same direction anymore. So it makes sense to go your separate ways, like rather than being all bitter and talking from experience here, it's a very traumatic thing that can be going through a divorce, but it doesn't have to be, because it can just be as simple as I'm going this way, you're going there, and let's just agree to go our separate ways. Which it sounds like, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but it sounds like that's what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I think that's really important that we don't know what's going on behind closed doors, because I think even in, so speaking from some degree of experience, even in the most amicable divorce, I think, spending any amount of time with another person in a relationship is, to suddenly stop doing that is a huge thing. I mean, you don't know whether they've been leading more and more separate lives over the last few years, and maybe this is just the end game. That might be where they're at, but I think, it's always going to be a grieving thing, isn't it, in terms of how you've lived your life for a certain number of years is inevitably modified by who you live with, and that works both ways for everybody. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm interested for her, I think, as well, because her identity has been very much as Mrs. Bill Gates, hasn't it? I mean, I know we all know her name, and we know she's done sterling work with the Gates Foundation, but I wonder about that in terms of how she feels about who she is as a person in her own right.
Yeah, I listened to an interview recently with her by Brené, we should talk about her as well, but it almost like how she describes when she first met like Bill Gates and how they courted. Oh my gosh, it sounds like he only had a diary opening like 3 weeks down the line that they could go out and have a date on, and she was actually in his team, but he was the overall like CEO of this tech company and she was in it, and so it was all a bit of a scandal that she was then going out with the boss. But so it's a really great interview, and there's this circle of women in America, and there's loads of women that are part of it. So obviously Melinda Gates is part of this. So you've got the big magic author
Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yeah, Elizabeth Gilbert, she's part of it. So yeah, this crew of incredible women who are just like creatively, or not just creatively, just like championing the way in America, and they all seem to be like best mates. Like, what a group to be part of.
Yeah, definitely.
We've joked, haven't we, about forming our own,
creating our own version, our own British version. Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Take over the UK. So yeah, Brené Brown as well. I've read lots of her books over the last few years. I think I was only introduced to her maybe like 4 years ago, but again, it's the same sort of veil of like braving the wilderness and getting out of those. It's quite a theme, isn't it, in my books I've read in my adult years, of just being inspired to do those incredible things in life, not just accepting the norm and the comfortable, easy life. Yeah, can't ever be accused of taking the easy road.
Definitely not. And that's, I suppose that's a key thing, isn't it, that these writers are enormously helpful in supporting us in that. There's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but we read to know we're not alone. And I think there's a lot of truth in that when it comes to any book you read, in fact, but certainly those books, and certainly when you're on your own kind of personal journey. So yeah, that's
really interesting, because that's the thing that's probably like the core reason as to why I wrote my book that I published last year, wasn't it? was, and you almost brought that out even more than I had written in my first sort of attempt, is bringing out more of my story, just so people can totally see that they're not the only ones to have made that decision, to have got into loads of debt, to have those quite taboo and shameful things happen to them. But yeah, get that written on a bit of paper, and that's and those are the messages I get from people. It's like, thank you for sharing your story. I know I'm not the only one. It's really helped me. See somebody else doing it and getting through it, and coming out the other side. So yeah.
Cool. Shall I try and wrap through the rest of my list?
Because I'm done now.
Yeah, this isn't a complete list, and I am conscious of time, so I will be quick. But other women that have been enormously influential for me, Virginia Woolf is a really big one. I first read Mrs Dalloway as part of my A-level English, and it was such an extraordinary sensation. I can almost sort of picture where I was in my bedroom reading those first few pages. Because she writes stream of consciousness, which I hadn't read anything like that up until being sort of how old was I, 16, and it really felt like somebody was writing like I thought, and that was a very, in that whole "we read to know we're not alone," that was a very inspiring experience. Virginia Woolf obviously has written A Room of One's Own as well, which is a key feminist text, which I hold very close to my heart as well. Lots I could say about Virginia Woolf. Orlando is another great book where, you know,
I've never this is, and now I'm going to come across as a literary uncouth person, but I've never read a Virginia Woolf book. So if I was to read one of her books, which one should I read?
Oh, I don't think you can go wrong with Mrs Dalloway as a good place to start. But I mean, she's an absolutely fascinating author. Again, I could spend at least an hour talking about her. You know, there's the hotel in St Ives that she used to live in, or there's a house that's a B&B or something. There's a plaque in St Ives. Anyway,
really,
to the Lighthouse in the book is set in Scotland, but in reality it's set in Cornwall. That's where she so that's another one. I think To the Lighthouse, I'd probably go with Mrs Dalloway first, to kind of get into the rhythm of what she writes. Orlando's this brilliant book where, and she always just played with everything the whole time. So halfway through it's sort of the history of the world, and there's this sort of the protagonist is a time traveler, and then halfway through changes gender. So, you know, it's almost it's really kind of before its time. She becomes he, or the other way around. The other book that I'd mention is Flush, which is the story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who was a Victorian writer. But it's written from the point of view of her spaniel, Flush. So one of the sort of writing experiment at play there is, how do you write a book written from the point of view of somebody whose senses, certainly smell and hearing, would be the key sort of senses for the dog. And it's a biography of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but through the eyes of her dog, which is really, it's fun. It's good fun. So yeah. So Virginia Woolf is high up there on my list of wonderful people. Maya Angelou, just stunning. And again, her books are brilliant and beautiful. I know Why the Caged Bird Sings and everything after that as well. But I would totally recommend, if anybody wants an audible recommendation, listen to any of her books. She has the most beautiful voice, and the stories that she has to tell from her life are just phenomenal. Also her poetry, talking of phenomenal, there's a poem called Phenomenal Women, and Still I Rise. All of those poems are incredibly uplifting and enriching, and yeah, so I totally recommend her work. And her work
did she write it's something Fire? It was recently turned into a really big TV series with Reese Witherspoon in it. Oh my gosh, she's part of the Brené Glennon group.
Well, no, so Maya Angelou is almost the sort of matriarch of that circle. So she was very close friends with Oprah Winfrey. She died a few years ago, but she was very close friends with Oprah Winfrey, and very much a champion of a kind of a sort of a feel the fear and do it anyway. And certainly that's how she lived her life. And she's, you know, her life was just so fascinating. And in one of the biographies, you know, just randomly, suddenly she's at home. It feels random. There's more to it than this. But she was a singer. She used to sing in clubs, I think. And so she knew, or she was a dancer. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, she did stuff in nightclubs. But one afternoon, Billie Holiday calls in and has like drinks with her, and there's just this really strange kind of moment where you're hearing this lovely story of Billie Holiday and Maya Angelou having a conversation, which just feels quite amazing. So she's high up on my list. Toni Morrison's another great writer. And then a couple of English ones that I'd want to, because a lot of my writing greats seem to be American, although obviously Virginia Woolf is English. Sara Maitland is a short story writer who writes using kind of magical realism. And I love that as a format. And again, she takes a lot of old myths or biblical stories or Greek mythology, and then just writes them from a really interesting kind of heartfelt, personal, female perspective. Doris Lessing is fantastic. The Golden Notebook is her kind of big work, I think, and the Golden Notebook is one that I read as I was going through the separation from my ex-husband, and it was a book that called to me from the corner of the room, and it's basically about a writer who's having a writer's block and a bit of a nervous breakdown all at once, and she writes in all these different notebooks. And she has a different notebook for different aspects of her life. So she's trying to keep all the parts of her life separated. So she has a red notebook because she's part of the British Communist Party. And she has a green notebook, let's say, for her love life, and a blue notebook for things about her story ideas, all sorts of different things. The way it's written is amazing. And it reads like you're reading somebody's journal as well. And then in between the notebooks, the different coloured notebooks, you get this story that is much more like a standard novel story between the protagonist Anna and her best mate Molly. And I don't know, this is very beautifully written, and it's for what it does for my money is it shows it's a really good expression of the experience of being a woman, and I don't know if this is true, but in A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf talks about the fact that you never really have writers writing that scene about what happens between two mates who are women. It's just not a done thing, because we're always aware that there's a male gaze, there's male eyes watching us. So even if we're writing the story, we write it with a sense of this is what the guys would expect us to be doing or saying. And my feeling with Doris Lessing is that she's, in some senses, has taken that, and the conversations between Molly and Anna feel to me to be very much that real conversation that goes on between two friends. So yeah, I could do more, but we shouldn't, so I'll stop. Although I might put in my latest discovery is Louise Doherty's Apple Tree Yard, which I'm just going to wave because I don't normally read suspense and thrillers, and this one has been pushed at me and is absolutely amazing. And again, actually does a fantastic job of pulling the blinds back on the experience of being a woman, a 52-year-old woman. So yeah, okay. I'll stop.
Very good. We're gonna have to you need to send me a list of all the authors you've talked about, so we can put it into the notes for the show. Okay. So if anybody actually wants to read these incredible books, or you may well be listening and nodding along like yeah I loved Judy Blume, and I loved all those kind of books growing up. It's almost like music holds huge memories throughout your throughout our lives, doesn't it? I think that was maybe one of our other podcast topics, wasn't it, to talk about music that shaped our lives. But yeah, books are the same. You just think of when you first read that book and where you were at that period of life. So yeah, as you've been talking through lots of your authors, like so many other authors have popped up into my head of, oh yeah, I read that and I read that.
Yeah. No, reading is amazing.
Yes, I need to do more of it now. I think though, even though I've already read Untamed 3 times, I'm going to re-listen to it again, because I lose my Audible subscription in like 2 weeks. So I think that's going to be the last thing I listen to. I'm not paying £8 a month for it anymore.
Well, you still get to keep the books you've already got.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's no hurry.
Oh, right. Well, I'm going to make sure I use up all my. So that means I've got 2 credits left. So you're going to have to send me a recommendation.
Maya Angelou. I don't even need to send it to you.
Okay.
Anything by Maya Angelou.
Okay. So
long as it's read by her, make sure that it's narrated by the author.
Okay, right. I'll do that for my last 2 credits. Yay! So yes, I hope you all enjoyed that journey through life, as well as our literary journey. And yeah, that's it for us. We'll be back again next week.
Shall I do my end bit?
Do your end bit.
Okay, so you've been listening to Mrs Mummypenny Talks with Ridley Writes, produced by Lynn Beattie. Podcast music composed and created by Dan Greensmith and hosted by myself, Rebecca Megson-Smith, and Lynn Beattie. Thank you very much for listening. And you can follow us on Instagram. Is a good place to find both of us. So you're at Ridley Writes and I'm Mrs Mummypenny UK, and our websites as well. Go check out stuff we've written, because we're both incredible writers. Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll take care. Talk soon. Bye bye.